blind woman was left at the crossroads, until a scarred cowboy took her hand forever. The Wyoming wind carried dust and disappointment across the empty crossroads where Sarah Mitchell sat on her worn leather trunk, her fingers tracing the familiar grooves of the brass corners. The stagecoach that had brought her from Denver was now just a distant memory, its wheels having carried away her last hope, along with the man who was supposed to be her husband. "Miss, you sure you don't want me to take you back to town?" The driver had asked one final time before departing, his voice heavy with concern. Sarah had shaken her head, her pride intact even as her world crumbled. "He said he'd come. I'll wait." But Harold Whitman wasn't coming. The letter clutched in her trembling hands made that painfully clear. "Cannot proceed with arrangement. Find other accommodations." 7 words that shattered the carefully constructed future her brother had arranged from back east. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the desolate stretch of road where 3 paths converged, one leading to Cedar Ridge, another to the mining camps up north, and the third disappearing into the endless prairie. Sarah had memorized these directions during the journey, never imagining she'd be stranded here, blind and alone with nowhere to go. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to block out the growing chill as shadows lengthened. Her fingers found the small purse in her lap, barely enough coins for a week's lodging, if she could even find her way to town. The reality of her situation settled over her like the approaching dusk. Hours passed. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant promise of rain. Sarah's throat grew parched, but she remained motionless, listening for the sound of approaching hooves or wagon wheels, anything that might signal rescue. Instead, she heard something else, the soft jingle of spurs and the measured gait of a horse walking slowly toward her. Sarah straightened, her heart racing. Could it be Harold finally coming to collect her? "Ma'am." The voice was deep, gravelly, nothing like the refined Eastern accent she'd expected. "You all right out here?" Sarah turned toward the sound, her unseeing eyes searching. I'm waiting for someone." The horse stopped nearby, and she heard the creak of leather as the rider dismounted. His footsteps were careful, deliberate as he approached. "Been waiting long?" he asked, and she could hear genuine concern in his voice. "Since this morning," she admitted, her composure finally beginning to crack. "The stagecoach left me here. I was supposed to be met, but nobody came." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. She heard him move closer, his boots scuffing against the dry earth. "Name's Jake Harrison," he said quietly. "And you shouldn't be out here alone, especially with weather coming in." Sarah lifted her chin. "I can take care of myself, Mr. Harrison." A pause. Then unexpectedly a low chuckle. "I'm sure you can, miss, but that doesn't mean you should have to." She heard him step back, then the sound of him leading his horse closer. "There's a storm brewing," he said. "You can feel it in the air. This crossroads ain't no place to spend the night." Sarah's resolve wavered. She could indeed sense the change in the atmosphere, the way the wind had shifted, bringing with it the metallic scent of approaching rain. Her practical nature warred with her stubborn pride. "I have nowhere else to go," she said finally, the words barely above a whisper. "Well," Jake said, and she could hear him settling down beside her. "Then I reckon I'll wait with you." Sarah turned toward him, startled. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to know someone to help them," he replied simply. "Besides, my horse could use the rest." They sat in companionable silence as the first drops of rain began to fall. Sarah found herself oddly comforted by his presence, this stranger who had chosen to stay rather than leave her to face the storm alone. "Might I ask," Jake said carefully, "what kind of man leaves a lady stranded at a crossroads?" Sarah's laugh was bitter, the kind who changes his mind when he discovers his intended bride is blind. She heard Jake's sharp intake of breath, felt his surprise in the sudden stillness beside her. "His loss," he said quietly, and something in his tone made Sarah's heart skip. The rain began in earnest then, fat drops that quickly turned into a steady downpour. Jake stood, and Sarah heard him moving around, the sound of something being dragged across the ground. "There's an old supply shed about 50 yards up the north trail," he said. "Saw it on my way down. It ain't much, but it'll keep us dry." Before Sarah could protest, she felt strong, calloused hands gently take her arms, helping her to her feet. "Your trunk," she said, turning back. "I'll get it," Jake assured her. You just hold onto my arm and let me guide you." As they made their way through the increasing rain, Sarah found herself studying this mysterious cowboy through her other senses. His voice carried the hint of an accent she couldn't place, and his movements were careful, measured like a man who'd learned to be cautious. When lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the landscape in brief, brilliant moments, she wished desperately that she could see his face. The shed was small and musty, but blessedly dry. Jake helped her settle on an old crate, while he brought in her trunk and tended to his horse under the lean-to attached to the side of the building. "Thank you," Sarah said when he returned, shaking the rain from his hat. "You didn't have to help me." "Maybe not," Jake replied, settling down across from her in the darkness. "But my mama raised me better than to leave a lady in distress." As the storm raged outside, Sarah found herself talking to this stranger, really talking, for the first time in months. She told him about her journey from Boston, about the brother who'd arranged her marriage to a man she'd never met, about the accident that had taken her sight when she was 12. And Jake listened, really listened, not with the polite patience she'd grown accustomed to, but with genuine interest and understanding. "What about you, Mr. Harrison?" she asked as the thunder began to fade. "What brings you to these crossroads?" A long pause. "Just passing through," he said finally. "Been doing that for a while now." Something in his voice told her there was more to the story, but she didn't press. They were both running from something, she realized. The difference was she'd been abandoned at the crossroads while he'd chosen to stop. As the night wore on and the storm finally passed, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "Mr. Harrison," she said softly, "I meant what I said about having nowhere to go. I have a little money, enough for room and board for a short while. If you're heading toward Cedar Ridge, you want to ride with me?" he said, understanding. "I know it's presumptuous of me to ask." "It ain't presumptuous at all," Jake interrupted gently. "And yes, ma'am, I'd be honored to see you safely to town." Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to chase away the darkness. Sarah smiled for the first time in days, not knowing that this moment, this decision to trust a scarred cowboy she couldn't even see, would lead to a love that would heal them both. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the Wyoming landscape, as Jake helped Sarah onto his horse, a gentle mare named Belle. The storm had washed the air clean, leaving behind the fresh scent of wet earth and sage. Sarah settled into the saddle behind Jake, her hands gripping his worn leather vest as they began the journey toward Cedar Ridge. "Tell me what you see," Sarah said softly as they rode, her voice barely audible over the steady clip-clop of Belle's hooves. Jake was quiet for a moment, as if considering her request. "Rolling hills stretching out like a green carpet," he said finally. "Dotted with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush mostly, red as fresh blood against the grass. Mountains in the distance, still capped with snow even in July." Sarah smiled, drinking in his words. Most people avoided describing things to her, uncomfortable with her blindness, but Jake's voice painted pictures that her mind could hold on to. "The sky's that particular shade of blue you only get out here in the territories," he continued. "Not a cloud in sight after last night's storm, and there's an eagle circling overhead, probably hunting for prairie dogs." As they rode, Sarah found herself relaxing against Jake's broad back. There was something solid and dependable about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had in months. She noticed things about him too, the way he sat straight in the saddle despite what seemed to be some kind of old injury, the careful way he guided Belle around rough patches of ground, always mindful of his passenger. "You ride like a soldier," she observed. Jake's back tensed slightly. "Used to be one. Long time ago. The cavalry? 7th Cavalry under Custer. Before—" He trailed off, his voice growing hard. "Before everything went to hell." Sarah felt the pain in those words, recognized the sound of a man carrying ghosts. "Is that where you got your scars?" She felt him turn slightly in the saddle, surprised by her directness. "How did you—" "Your voice changes when you talk about it," she explained gently. "And I felt them when you helped me up earlier. On your hands, your arms. They tell a story." Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if she'd overstepped. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Little Bighorn, June 25th, 1876. Lost a lot of good men that day. Barely made it out myself." Sarah's breath caught. She'd heard the stories, read the newspaper accounts back in Boston. The massacre that had shocked the nation, where Custer and his men had been overwhelmed by Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. "It was my own fault for staying in the army after that," Jake continued, as if the words were being pulled from him against his will. "Took a bullet in the shoulder 2 years later, another skirmish. That's when I finally had enough of fighting other people's wars." They rode in comfortable silence after that, the sun climbing higher as they made their way across the vast landscape. Sarah found herself thinking about this complex man who'd rescued her, a soldier turned drifter, carrying his own wounds just as she carried hers. Around midday, they stopped by a clear stream to rest Belle and share what little food Jake had in his saddlebags: jerky, hardtack, and water flavored with coffee grounds. Sarah sat on a fallen log while Jake tended to his horse, listening to the gentle babble of water over stones. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said as he settled beside her. "Of course. That man who was supposed to meet you, Harold Whitman, what made you agree to marry someone you'd never met?" Sarah's fingers found a smooth stone, turning it over in her hands. "Security," she said honestly. "After my parents died, I became a burden to my brother and his wife. They never said so directly, but I could hear it in their voices, feel it in the way they moved around me. Harold's letter said he needed a wife to help run his general store, someone respectable and educated. My blindness wouldn't matter for keeping books and managing correspondence. Sounds more like a business arrangement than a marriage." "It was," Sarah admitted. "But I hoped it might grow into something more. Foolish of me." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Don't sound foolish to me. Sounds like you were trying to make the best of a difficult situation." Sarah turned toward his voice, struck by the understanding in his tone. "What about you? Ever been married?" "No, ma'am. Never found a woman willing to put up with a broken-down cavalry sergeant with more scars than sense." "Maybe you haven't met the right woman yet." Something in the air between them shifted, became charged with possibility. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, surprised by her own boldness. "Maybe not," Jake said softly. They resumed their journey in the early afternoon, the conversation flowing more easily now. Jake told her about the places he'd been since leaving the army: cattle drives through Texas, mining camps in Colorado, railroad work in Kansas, always moving, never staying long enough to put down roots. Sarah shared stories of her life in Boston, the school for the blind where she'd learned to read Braille, the small freedoms she'd carved out for herself despite her overprotective family, her love of music and literature. "You play piano?" Jake asked when she mentioned her musical training. "I did. My brother sold it before I left. Said there wouldn't be room for such things in my new life." Jake's voice turned hard. "Seems like your brother was mighty eager to get rid of you." "He thought he was doing what was best," Sarah said, though she'd wondered the same thing herself. As the afternoon wore on, Cedar Ridge came into view, a small frontier town nestled in a valley between rolling hills. Sarah could hear the sounds before Jake described them: the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle, the voices of people going about their daily business. "It's not much to look at," Jake said as they rode down the main street. "Maybe 300 souls if you count the surrounding ranches, but it's got what you need: hotel, general store, church, saloon, even a schoolhouse." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness as reality set in. "I should find the hotel," she said. "Figure out what I'm going to do next." Jake guided Belle to a stop in front of a 2-story building. Sarah could hear the creak of a wooden sign swaying in the breeze. "Morrison's Hotel," Jake read. "Looks respectable enough." He helped Sarah down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. Sarah felt her heart race at the contact, at the realization that their journey together was ending. "Thank you," she said, turning toward him though she couldn't see his face. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." "Nothing bad was going to happen to you," Jake said firmly. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah Mitchell." The way he said her name sent warmth spreading through her chest. She reached out tentatively, her fingers finding his hand. His skin was rough, weathered, marked by the scars she'd felt earlier. "Will I see you again?" she asked, then caught herself and laughed softly. Poor choice of words. Jake's thumb traced gently across her knuckles. "I'll be around town for a few days. Need to resupply before I head north." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment that he was still planning to leave. "Well then, I suppose this isn't goodbye." "No, ma'am," Jake said quietly. It's not. As Sarah made her way into the hotel, guided by Jake's careful directions, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she'd never imagined. Behind her, she heard Jake leading Belle toward what she assumed was the livery stable, his spurs jingling softly in the dust. For the first time since leaving Boston, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. And it was all because of a scarred cowboy who'd chosen to help a stranger at a crossroads, asking for nothing in return except the chance to keep her safe. The hotel proprietor, Mrs. Morrison, was a kind woman who helped Sarah settle into a small but clean room on the second floor. As evening fell over Cedar Ridge, Sarah sat by her window, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night, and found herself wondering what tomorrow would bring. Somewhere out there, Jake Harrison was doing the same. Sarah woke to the sound of piano music drifting up from the hotel's dining room below. For a moment, she lay still in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the gentle melody that reminded her of the instrument her brother had sold. The player was skilled but hesitant, as if working through a piece they hadn't touched in years. After dressing and making her way carefully downstairs, Sarah discovered that the pianist was Mrs. Morrison herself, playing an old upright that had seen better days. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Morrison said, stopping mid-song when she noticed Sarah. "I hope I didn't wake you. I don't often get the chance to play when the hotel's full of guests." "Please don't stop on my account," Sarah said. "It's beautiful. I used to play myself." Mrs. Morrison's face lit up. "Would you like to try?" "This old thing needs more attention than I can give it." Sarah's fingers trembled as they found the keys. It had been months since she'd touched a piano, and the familiar feel of ivory beneath her fingertips brought tears to her eyes. She began with a simple Bach piece, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar passages. "Heavenly," Mrs. Morrison breathed. "My dear, you have a gift." The music had drawn other guests to the dining room, and when Sarah finished, she heard genuine applause. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Ridge, she felt useful, valued for something other than pity. "Miss Mitchell?" Sarah turned toward the familiar voice, her heart skipping. Jake stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his hair still damp from what appeared to be a recent washing. "Mr. Harrison," she said, unable to hide her pleasure. "Good morning." "Heard the music from the street," he explained, stepping closer. "Thought I recognized the melody, but, well, I ain't never heard it played so beautifully." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Morrison was kind enough to let me play." "More than kind," Mrs. Morrison interjected. "Sarah, dear, would you consider giving lessons? We have several children in town whose parents would pay well for proper musical instruction." Sarah's breath caught. The possibility hadn't occurred to her. Earning her own living, being independent rather than dependent. I would need to think about it." "Of course," Mrs. Morrison said, "but there's certainly a need. The schoolteacher, Miss Andrews, has been asking about finding someone to teach music and literature. The town's growing, and we want our children to have proper education." After breakfast, Jake offered to show Sarah around Cedar Ridge. As they walked the dusty main street, his hand steady on her arm, he described the growing community with the eye of someone who'd seen many frontier towns. "Blacksmith shop there on the left," he said as they passed the source of the rhythmic hammering Sarah had heard the day before. "Tom Muller, came from Germany 5 years ago, makes the finest horseshoes and tools in 3 counties. They passed the general store, the one where Sarah might have worked if Harold Whitman had kept his promise. She felt no regret now, only gratitude that fate had intervened. "Church is just ahead," Jake continued. "Reverend Clark holds services twice a week, and his wife runs a ladies' auxiliary that does good work for families in need." Sarah noticed how Jake spoke about the town with growing warmth, as if seeing it through fresh eyes. "You sound like you're getting attached to this place." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "Been drifting for 4 years now. Getting tired of always moving on." They stopped at the schoolhouse, a simple wooden building with a bell tower and windows that would let in plenty of natural light. Miss Andrews, a young woman from back east, greeted them warmly and showed Sarah around the single classroom. "I've been hoping to expand our curriculum," Miss Andrews explained. "Music, literature, perhaps even some basic French. The children are eager to learn, and their parents want them to have opportunities they never had." Sarah ran her fingers along the worn wooden desks, imagining young voices reciting lessons, laughing during recess. "How many students do you have?" 23 ranging from 6 to 16. Some of the older ones help with the younger children. It's a good community that way, people looking out for each other. As they left the school, Sarah found herself walking more slowly, reluctant to end the tour. Cedar Ridge was nothing like Boston, but there was something appealing about its simplicity, its sense of community. "There's one more place I'd like to show you," Jake said as they reached the edge of town. "If you don't mind a short walk." He guided her along a well-worn path that led up a gentle hill behind the church. Sarah could hear birds singing in the trees and smell the sweet scent of wild roses blooming somewhere nearby. "There," Jake said, bringing them to a stop. "What do you think?" Sarah turned her face toward the warmth of the afternoon sun, listening to the sounds around her. A gentle breeze carried the distant lowing of cattle and the faint sound of children playing in town below. "Tell me what you see," she said softly. Jake's voice grew tender as he described the vista before them. The whole town spread out below like a patchwork quilt. Beyond that, pasture land stretching to the horizon, dotted with cattle and horses. Mountains in the distance, purple-blue in the afternoon light. And right here, he paused, moving closer to her. "Right here there's a spot where someone could build a little house. Close enough to town to be part of the community, far enough away for privacy." Sarah's heart began to race. "It sounds perfect." "Sarah," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." She turned toward him, sensing the change in his demeanor. "I've been running for 4 years, he began. From the war, from the memories, from the idea that I might deserve something good in my life. But yesterday, when I found you at those crossroads, something changed." Sarah reached out tentatively, her fingers finding his face. She traced the lines there, the rough stubble of his jaw, feeling the truth of his words in the tension of his muscles. "I know I don't have much to offer," Jake continued, his hand covering hers. "I've got some money saved, enough to buy a small spread of land. But I'm damaged goods, Sarah. Scarred inside and out." "We all have scars," Sarah whispered. "Some are just more visible than others." Jake's thumb brushed across her cheek and she realized she was crying. "Are you asking me to stay?" she asked. "I'm asking if you'd consider building something with me," Jake said. "Here in Cedar Ridge, you could teach music, maybe help at the school. I could raise horses. Always had a way with them. We could make a life together, if you're willing." Sarah's mind raced. Everything was happening so fast, yet it felt inevitable, as if she'd been moving toward this moment her entire life. "I barely know you," she said, but her voice held no conviction. "Then we'll take time to know each other," Jake replied. "No rush, no pressure. I can't leave you here and right away, Sarah. I can't do it." Sarah thought of her brother's relief when she'd left Boston, of Harold Whitman's rejection, of all the times she'd been made to feel like a burden. Here was a man asking her to build something with him, not despite her blindness, but because of who she was as a person. "The house on the hill," she said finally. "Would it have a piano?" Jake's laugh was rich and warm. "The biggest, finest piano we can find." Sarah stood on her tiptoes and kissed him then, her lips finding his with surprising accuracy. It was gentle, tentative, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," Sarah whispered. "To all of it." As the sun began to set over Cedar Ridge, painting the sky in shades Sarah could only imagine, she felt something she'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. In the arms of a scarred cowboy who saw past her blindness to the woman underneath. In a town that would welcome her gifts. On a hill where they would build their dreams together. The crossroads where she'd been abandoned now seemed like the beginning of her real life rather than the end of her old one. Sometimes, Sarah thought as Jake's arms tightened around her, the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of their newly built house on the hill, her wedding dress rustling softly in the autumn breeze. The simple white gown had been sewn by the ladies of Cedar Ridge, each stitch a testament to how fully she'd been embraced by the community. "You ready, darling?" Jake's voice came from behind her, warm and steady as always. Sarah turned toward him, her fingers finding the rough texture of his best suit, the one he'd bought specially for their wedding day. "I've been ready since that night in the storm shelter." Jake chuckled, taking her hands in his scarred ones. "Reverend Clark's waiting. and half the town's gathered in the church. Mrs. Morrison's been crying happy tears since sunrise. As they made their way down the hill together, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. Her music lessons had become the pride of Cedar Ridge, with children traveling from neighboring ranches to study with her. Jake's horse breeding operation was already showing promise, his gentle way with the animals earning respect throughout the territory. But more than that, they had healed each other. Jake's nightmares had faded as Sarah's patient love helped him find peace with his past. Her fears of being a burden had dissolved under his unwavering devotion and the town's genuine affection. "Sarah," Jake said as they paused outside the church, "I want you to know something. That day I found you at the Crossroads. That was the day my real life began." Sarah smiled, her heart full to overflowing. "Mine too." The church bells rang out across the valley as they entered together, husband and wife in all but name, ready to make their promises before God and community. Sarah had been abandoned at the crossroads by one man's rejection, only to be found by another man's love. As Reverend Clark began the ceremony, Sarah heard the sounds that had become the soundtrack of her new life. Children giggling in the pews, Mrs. Morrison sniffling with joy, the creak of wooden benches filled with neighbors who had become family. "Do you, Jacob Harrison, take Sarah to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jake said firmly, his voice carrying across the small church. "And do you, Sarah Mitchell, take Jacob to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Sarah squeezed Jake's hands, feeling the strength and gentleness that had saved her from despair and given her a future she'd never dared dream of. "I do," she said, her voice clear and certain. As Jake's lips met hers in their first kiss as husband and wife, Sarah thought about the mysterious ways life could change in a single moment. She'd been left at a crossroads, broken and abandoned. But sometimes, being lost was the only way to be found. The scarred cowboy who had taken her hand that stormy night had given her something more precious than sight. He had given her a life worth living, a love worth having, and a home where she would never again be left behind. Outside, the first snow began to fall on Cedar Ridge, blanketing their world in pristine white. But inside the warm church, surrounded by love and laughter, Sarah and Jake began their journey together. No longer two wounded souls adrift, but partners ready to face whatever crossroads lay ahead, hand in hand, forever. What did you think of Sarah and Jake's incredible love story? Did their journey from that fateful crossroads to building a life together in Cedar Ridge touch your heart the way it touched ours? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us your favorite moment from their story, or share if you've ever experienced a life-changing encounter like theirs. If you enjoyed this tale of love, resilience, and second chances set in the rugged American frontier, please give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that celebrate the power of human connection. Your support helps us continue bringing you these inspiring tales of love, conquering all odds. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. And thank you for joining Sarah and Jake on their beautiful journey from strangers to soulmates.